What if you could go through your entire day, meetings, arguments, traffic, betrayal, and never once lose your calm? What if anger stopped controlling you, draining your peace and defining your reactions? For most people, anger feels automatic, almost inevitable, like a reflex to unfairness, disrespect, or frustration. But what if that reflex was never yours to begin with, only a habit passed down, never questioned? In this video, we're going to explore the Stoic path to emotional mastery. A quiet strength that doesn't shout, doesn't shake, and doesn't need to prove anything to anyone. Because the truth is, anger doesn't make you powerful, it makes you predictable. And predictable men are easy to provoke, easy to manipulate, and easy to lose control. Here, we'll uncover the root of that fire inside, not to put it out, but to understand it so well, it never burns you again. You'll learn how to pause before the explosion, how to reframe insult into indifference, and how to turn everyday triggers into training grounds for discipline and peace. You are not weak for wanting peace. You are wise for choosing it. You are not alone in your struggle to stay composed. Many are fighting the same inner battle, but few are handed the tools. So stay with me. The most powerful insight is coming. And if it speaks to you, share your thoughts below. And subscribe to join a space where men like you build strength in silence. 1. Anger is not power, it's a loss of control. We live in a world where rage is mistaken for strength, where the louder you yell, the more respect you're supposed to command, where slamming a door, raising your voice, or firing off an impulsive message is seen as taking control. But the truth is far less flattering. Every time you explode in anger, what you're actually showing isn't power. It's absence of control. It's the mind being hijacked, emotions driving the wheel, and your values getting silenced under the noise of reactivity. And whether it's at work, in a relationship, or in traffic, when you act out of anger, you aren't leading, you're leaking. You're leaking calm, leaking credibility, and most dangerously, leaking your identity to someone else's provocation. The reason this matters isn't just philosophical, it's profoundly practical. Because when anger becomes your default response, you become predictable. And in a world that's constantly testing your patience, predictability makes you vulnerable. It means anyone with the right tone or insult can pull you out of your clarity and drag you into their chaos. A careless word from a stranger, a critical email from a coworker, a delayed flight, a disrespectful driver. You think you're being assertive when you lash out, but what you're doing is handing over your power. You're allowing external events to dictate your internal state. And that's not power. That's dependence in disguise. Now, let's link this back to something deeper. Stoicism teaches about emotional resilience and the discipline of perception. Marcus Aurelius, a man who ruled an empire but never let anger rule him, wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy, because to respond with rage is to mirror the very thing that disturbed you." And if the Stoics knew anything, it was that true power begins when you don't react, not when you react louder, faster, or more violently. Real strength is stillness. And stillness doesn't come from suppressing anger, it comes from understanding where it starts. Expectation. The expectation that people should treat you better, that the plans should unfold perfectly, that the world should meet you on your terms. When those expectations aren't met, what arises is the fire of frustration. But fire needs fuel, and Stoicism helps you stop feeding it. Let me show you how this applies to life, quietly, daily, and without drama. Picture a man coming home from work, exhausted after a long day, and his child spills juice all over the floor. His instinct might be to raise his voice, maybe even scold harshly. But what if he paused? What if he remembered that power is not what you show in your volume, but what you contain in your silence? In that moment, his calmness becomes instruction. His restraint teaches more than anger ever could. And it's not just about parenting. It's about who you are when nobody's watching. It's about how you respond when you're under pressure, exhausted, disrespected, or misunderstood. In truth, most men aren't angry because of the world. They're angry because they feel powerless within it. Their job doesn't respect them. Their partner doesn't hear them. Their past weighs on them. And rather than confront those silent wars, they fight loud ones, with strangers, with traffic, with themselves. That's why this shift matters so much. Because when you understand that anger is not your ally, you stop defending it like one. You stop glorifying rage as a sign of passion and start seeing it for what it is, a crack in the armor of your self-mastery. A signal that something within you still needs attention, not a target outside you that needs to be destroyed. I remember a man I once worked with. Steady, quiet, not the kind who sought the spotlight. But once, in a high-pressure meeting, someone talked over him repeatedly. You could see his jaw tighten and his hands grip the table. Everyone expected him to push back. But he just nodded, waited, then said one sentence that dismantled the arrogance in the room. Calmly, clearly, without venom, and you could feel the shift. That's the kind of strength no anger can touch. That's the difference between reacting and responding, between being emotional and being in command. So the next time you feel the burn rising in your chest, the heat behind your ears, the shallow breath, the shaken voice, remember, that's not strength trying to emerge. That's your peace under attack. And if you react, you're not winning. You're losing the one thing Stoicism teaches us to protect above all, our command over ourselves. Power is not about being feared. It's about being unmoved, being still, even when the storm is loud, being steady, especially when chaos invites you to join it. Anger wants to convince you that you're defending your dignity, but more often than not, it's just your ego in disguise. And when your ego runs the show, wisdom exits quietly. So hold the line. Breathe through the moment. Let others throw the match. You don't have to be the one holding gasoline. You don't have to win the world's battles. You only have to win the one within. That is where mastery begins. And when you finally grasp this, truly understand it, you'll realize you were never meant to be angry. You were meant to rise. 2. Your reaction is always your responsibility. Blame feels good for a while. It gives you a villain to point at, a reason to explode, a way to justify every angry word and harsh reaction. But the moment you place your emotional state in someone else's hands, you surrender the most essential kind of freedom. The freedom to respond instead of react. People say things. Life gets messy. Plans fall apart. And while you can't control any of that, you are always in control of what happens next inside you. Your reaction is never someone else's responsibility. It's yours, fully, undeniably, and inescapably. And understanding that doesn't limit you. It sets you free. The world isn't short on triggers. You will be misunderstood, overlooked, interrupted, tested, and even insulted. That's inevitable. But Stoicism, unlike motivational fluff, doesn't promise that people will treat you better. It trains you to remain grounded even when they don't. Because when your peace depends on the behavior of others, your life becomes a series of emotional landmines. One wrong word, and boom, your focus is shattered. One driver cuts you off, and your blood pressure spikes. But when you train your mind to respond instead of react, you stop living in a state of constant volatility. You stop being emotionally outsourced. It's a powerful shift, moving from "he made me angry" to "I let myself feel anger." That difference is subtle in words, but seismic in effect. Because the moment you take ownership of your response, you regain command of your direction. That's what Stoicism is really about. Not escaping life's difficulties, but mastering your navigation through it. And that mastery doesn't come through denial. It comes through presence. It begins the moment you stop pointing fingers and start asking, what do I want to be responsible for right now? My anger or my dignity? Let me take you into a moment that changed everything for a man I once coached. Let's call him Dean. He was the kind of guy who had built a solid life, decent job, good family, sharp mind, but still found himself constantly irritated, on edge, and emotionally hijacked by small things. One evening, after a long day, he went to a local diner. The server was distracted, forgot his order, and then brought the wrong dish. Dean felt that familiar surge, frustration tightening in his chest, the urge to snap. But then something paused him. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was his recent practice in detachment. But instead of reacting, he asked himself, quietly, will this response build the man I'm trying to become? That one question rewired the moment. Instead of complaining, he smiled, asked gently for a correction, and moved on. The food got fixed, the tension dissolved, and more importantly, he walked out with pride, not regret. That's the kind of power we're after here. the kind of quiet authority that doesn't need to dominate others to feel secure. When you choose your reaction, even when everything around you tempts chaos, you become unshakable. That doesn't mean becoming emotionless. It means becoming emotionally sovereign, able to feel without being ruled, to notice without being consumed. It's a muscle, and like all muscles, it grows through repetition. Traffic, emails, interruptions, criticism. Every single moment of pressure is a chance to choose yourself over your impulse. You won't win them all. Sometimes your emotions will get the better of you, but that doesn't mean you failed. It means you've been shown where your practice still needs sharpening. That's all. No shame, just awareness. That's what Marcus Aurelius practiced as emperor of the Roman Empire. Not perfection, but presence. He wrote not to impress others, but to remind himself, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. When you stop blaming others for your inner state, the first thing you'll notice is discomfort. That's normal. You'll be tempted to go back to the old patterns. But if you push through that, something deeper awakens, a sense of dignity that doesn't rely on approval, fairness, or agreement. It just is. It becomes your anchor in conflict, your compass in confusion. And the more you choose it, the more natural it becomes. There's a moment in every heated situation where the future is decided. Before the shouting, before the reaction, it's the pause, the space, the breath. And in that space, you get to choose whether you give power to the storm outside or claim the stillness inside. That's the difference between living as a slave to circumstance and leading yourself through it. So if you've spent years saying, I wouldn't have gotten angry if they hadn't, stop. Because the truth is, they may have started the fire, but you're the one holding the match. And you can put it down anytime. You can build a mind that doesn't flinch at disrespect, a presence that doesn't crack under pressure, and a life that isn't dictated by every passing conflict. That's not fantasy, that's freedom. And it's yours to claim. Not by wishing for a calmer world, but by becoming the calmest person in it. The world doesn't need more noise. It needs more men who know how to be silent inside when the world outside is loud. So the next time the moment comes, when your peace is tested and your anger rises, don't ask what they did to deserve your reaction. Ask what you want your reaction to say about the man you're becoming. Because your reaction is always your responsibility. And once you truly understand that, you'll never be controlled by anyone's chaos again. 3. Nobody can make you angry without your permission. Someone cuts in front of you at the store. A colleague talks behind your back. A stranger mocks your opinion online. The fire lights instantly, your jaw clenches, your breath shortens, and before you realize it, your peace is gone, hijacked by a few words or a careless action. But here's the truth, one that hits hard when it finally lands. They didn't make you angry. You allowed it. As uncomfortable as it sounds, no one has access to the control room of your emotions unless you hand them the keys. That sting you feel when insulted or ignored isn't installed by someone else. It's activated by your own interpretation. And once you begin to grasp this, everything about how you handle anger begins to change. The world is loud, messy, and often inconsiderate. But if every rude comment, every act of disrespect, or every moment of thoughtlessness has the power to rattle your inner calm, then your peace is on lease, constantly renewed by external validation. Stoic philosophy doesn't ask you to stop feeling, it teaches you to stop outsourcing. Because the truth is, emotion without reflection becomes reaction, and reaction without responsibility becomes chaos. That's why understanding the internal origin of anger is not weakness, it's a radical form of strength. You don't become calmer by avoiding conflict, but by understanding that conflict, on its own, holds no emotional power. You assign that meaning, you write that story. Let's look at a real moment. A man named Andre, quiet, steady, once found himself ambushed in a meeting. His idea was dismissed publicly, not just disagreed with, but ridiculed. Every eye in the room turned. The younger version of him would have snapped back, defended, raised his voice, and maybe burned bridges in the process. But this time something shifted. He paused. He looked at the person speaking and simply said, "You're entitled to your view." Then he calmly laid out the reasoning on his idea, without a trace of emotional weight. That moment didn't make him weak. It made him untouchable. Because he understood something most don't. Anger is often a poor man's armor, while self-command is the strength no insult can penetrate. Link this idea back to the core of Stoic living, and you see a clear pattern. Marcus Aurelius wrote extensively about how our minds, not the world, create our suffering. Epictetus drilled it down to one piercing truth. It is not things themselves that disturb us, but our opinions about them. And that opinion, that internal filter, is what you control. Not their tone, not their attitude, but your lens. If someone calls you a name, it's nothing but sound. Until you attach meaning, allow entry, and let it define you. The moment you recognize that interpretation is a choice, you stop being a prisoner of other people's words. But this doesn't mean you become indifferent to everything around you. It means you become deliberate. You feel what's real without being dictated by it. You acknowledge irritation, but you don't let it drive. You experience disrespect, but you don't build your response around it. In every moment of insult lies an opportunity, not to retaliate, but to rise. Because nothing confuses the petty more than poise, and nothing earns more long-term respect than someone who refuses to be shaken by nonsense. Still, this shift isn't instant. It's a practice. It begins when you start noticing your triggers, not to indulge them, but to investigate them. Why did that comment strike a nerve? Why did that tone raise your blood pressure? The answer is usually not about them. It's about you. About wounds unhealed, ego untrained, or expectations unchecked. And that's where real work happens. Not in silencing the world, but in calming your own internal storm. One of the hardest pills to swallow is this. The people who trigger you the most are usually your greatest teachers. Not because they're wise, but because they show you where you're still weak. And that weakness is not shameful. It's information, a mirror. An invitation to fortify the very parts of yourself that keep giving power away. Every time you don't respond with rage, every time you choose silence over escalation and presence over provocation, you build strength. Quiet, permanent, unshakable strength. I remember a time when I too took things personally too often. A passive-aggressive comment here, a sarcastic dig there. It ate at me. Until one day, someone I respected deeply asked me, "Why does that matter so much to you?" I didn't have an answer. Just silence. And that silence forced me to face the truth. I was still trying to get permission from people I didn't even admire to feel good about myself. That's not peace. That's performance. Since then, my question has shifted. I don't ask, "Why did they say that?" I ask, "Why does it still affect me?" So the next time you feel your anger rising because of someone's words, step back, not to suppress it, but to examine it. Ask yourself, what am I giving this moment the power to do? If the answer is, to ruin my day, to shift my state, to rob me of peace, then you know what to do. Reclaim your authority, reframe the meaning, and remind yourself, nobody gets to make you angry unless you give them permission. Once you understand that truth, not just hear it, but own it, you stop living at the mercy of other people's moods. You stop reacting to every storm like it's your responsibility to fight it. And you start walking through life like a man who knows that his peace is not a gift from others, but a standard he holds within himself. 4. The pause between stimulus and response is your freedom. There is a moment so small, most people never notice it. A fraction of time that hides between what happens to you and how you choose to respond. And yet in that sliver of space lies the only real freedom you'll ever need. The freedom to remain unshaken, to hold your ground, and to act in alignment with your values rather than your impulses. That pause is not passive, it's powerful. During that pause, you decide whether to live like a slave to reaction or a master of restraint. When you skip it, you surrender your life to instinct. When you claim it, you reclaim yourself. This is not a metaphor. This is the mechanism behind every regrettable argument, every broken relationship, every burst of rage that spirals into consequence. Most people live in a loop. Stimulus comes, reaction follows, damage spreads. They never stop long enough to realize that between the trigger and their reaction was a choice they didn't make. But the Stoic mind does something different. It stretches time, not by slowing the world down, but by slowing the self down. It doesn't jump from emotion to action. It observes, it breathes, it waits, And in that waiting, it finds something rare: clarity. Clarity is not just seeing a situation for what it is. It's the discipline not to let that situation dictate who you become in it. When a Stoic feels the heat rise, they don't fear it, but they also don't obey it, because they understand that not everything that rises deserves expression, and not every feeling deserves an audience. The pause is where emotions are held, not hidden, where they're allowed to be seen but not given command. And that's where strength is born, not in the absence of emotion, but in the containment of it. Why is this pause so important to anger? Because anger thrives in immediacy. It needs speed. It feeds on the rush. That's why your worst reactions happen fast, before your higher mind has a chance to engage. The moment you interrupt that cycle, you weaken anger's grip. You give your reason a seat at the table. And once reason arrives, everything changes. The energy that once surged toward retaliation now moves toward understanding. The tension that once demanded release now becomes something you can shape, direct, and even dissolve. And none of that happens without the pause. This is where Stoic practice shifts from theory to muscle memory. Because the pause isn't something you discover one day and never lose again. It's something you train daily, in small, unglamorous moments. It's built every time you feel the itch to lash out, but instead, take a breath. Every time you feel the insult land, but instead ask yourself, does this need a reaction or just a release? And the more you train, the longer the pause becomes. What once was half a second becomes a full one. What once felt automatic begins to feel optional. And that's the point. The goal is not to feel nothing. The goal is to feel fully, then respond intentionally. Stoicism doesn't promise you an emotionless life. It offers you an examined one. And the examination begins in the pause. That's where you reflect. That's where you access every tool you've practiced: detachment, discipline, empathy, humility. Without the pause, those tools remain locked. With it, they become your shield. Anger can't penetrate a man who pauses, because he doesn't let the first wave take him. He watches it pass. He waits for stillness. And only then does he act. Let's not mistake this for suppression. The pause is not a cage. It's a filter. It doesn't bottle emotion. It distills it. It lets you decide what gets released and what gets refined. And when you start living this way, people notice. Not because you dominate a room, but because you stop being easy to provoke. You stop flinching at the insult. You stop jumping to defend. You become something rare, unavailable to chaos. Not out of arrogance, but out of quiet command. And that kind of presence changes everything, from the way you lead, to the way you parent, to the way you treat yourself after a mistake. I used to be quick to talk back, quick to interrupt, quick to respond with emotion first and thought later. And it cost me peace, relationships, and self-respect. Until one day, someone I trusted said, "You're not weak because you pause. You're wise because you do." And that moment didn't make me better overnight, but it made me start noticing the space, start expanding it. And in that space, I found my strength, not in silence, but in sovereignty. So the next time life comes at you fast, remember this. The moment you feel pressure is not the moment to speak. It's the moment to stop. Because in that pause lies your true power. Not to control others, but to control yourself. That's what separates those who are easily moved from those who become unmovable. That's what turns instinct into insight. That's what keeps you from becoming someone you regret. So let the world be fast, you be still. And in that stillness, let your freedom speak. 5. Most anger comes from expecting the world to obey you. Anger doesn't always announce itself with shouting or fists. Sometimes it creeps in through the quiet disappointment that life didn't bend the way you wanted it to. The traffic light didn't turn green fast enough. The delivery came late. Someone didn't reply to your message, didn't give you credit, didn't behave the way you believed they should. And suddenly, your day spirals. Not because the world was cruel, but because it wasn't obedient. Beneath the surface of most rage isn't just frustration, it's unmet expectation. A belief that reality owes you smoothness, that people should think like you, act like you, move for you. And when they don't, the gap between desire and reality fills with resentment. But here's the hard truth that leads to your freedom. The world was never designed to follow your rules. We've been conditioned to expect convenience, fairness, and precision. You book a ride, you expect it to arrive exactly on time. You work hard, you expect recognition. You love deeply, you expect loyalty in return. These assumptions sound reasonable, even logical, but when logic collides with life's unpredictability, anger rises. Not because of injustice, but because of resistance to what is. And resistance, when repeated enough, turns into bitterness. Stoic philosophy doesn't tell you to stop wanting good things. It teaches you to stop needing them to happen exactly your way to stay calm. The more rigid your expectations, the more fragile your peace. Let's ground this in something familiar. Imagine a man who starts his morning routine like clockwork. He makes coffee, opens his laptop, and starts his workday with a clear plan. Then his Wi-Fi cuts out. His child bursts in crying, his client reschedules, and just like that, his perfect blueprint for the day begins to crumble. Now, none of these events is catastrophic, but to someone clinging tightly to control, they feel like personal attacks. He snaps at his kid, slams his laptop, and mutters curses under his breath. Not because the world collapsed, but because it didn't comply. What this man doesn't realize is that his anger wasn't caused by his child, or the internet, or the client. It was caused by an invisible contract he wrote with life, that everything would go as planned. And life didn't sign that contract. When you truly understand this, your entire approach to anger transforms. You stop looking outward to fix your peace and start loosening your grip on how you think things should be. The Stoics mastered this through a brutal kind of honesty. They expected life to be hard, people to be flawed, and plans to fall through. And because of that, they weren't shaken when those things actually happened. That's not pessimism. That's emotional resilience. The kind that doesn't crumble when reality refuses to cooperate. This mindset doesn't make you passive, it makes you powerful. Because now your peace is no longer held hostage by whether or not the barista spells your name right, whether your spouse agrees with your opinion, or whether the weather ruins your outing. You become responsive instead of reactive, adaptable instead of rigid, calm, not because things are perfect, but because your expectations are grounded in reality, not fantasy. It's easy to say, life happens, but it's harder to accept it when it derails something important to you. That's why this isn't about dismissing your feelings, but owning their source. Your boss cancels a meeting last minute, you feel disrespected, but what hurts more, the reschedule, or the belief that they should have respected your time? Your partner forgets a detail you mentioned, you feel unimportant. But was it their mistake, or your silent demand that they must remember everything I say? These small inner demands build up silently, and when broken, they trigger not just emotion, but identity-level disruption. That's why Stoicism urges us not just to react less, but to expect differently. I remember a phase in my life where every delay, every broken plan, every human error set me off. I thought the world needed discipline. In reality, I needed flexibility. I started practicing a simple mantra whenever things didn't go my way. This is what was always possible. A delay? Always possible. A misunderstanding? Always possible. And suddenly, my anger had nowhere to go. It couldn't feed on surprise anymore. I wasn't caught off guard, I was prepared. Not in cynicism, but in clarity. So when the world doesn't move how you want it to, pause. Not to suppress your frustration, but to ask, was I expecting the world to obey me? And if the answer is yes, shift your focus. Let go of how it should have been and meet what it is. You'll find that most of your peace was never lost. It was just buried under unrealistic demands. When you stop expecting perfect service, perfect timing, and perfect behavior, you start seeing reality for what it is. Messy, dynamic, full of unknowns. And in that space, anger fades. Not because life became easier, but because you became stronger. Strong enough to be fluid. Strong enough to remain unmoved when your day doesn't bow to your plan. True calm isn't achieved when the world changes. It's achieved when your grip on how it must look finally loosens. And when it does, you'll not only stop being angry, you'll start being free. 6. Letting go is not weakness, it's mastery. The world will try to convince you that holding on means strength, that if you clench your fists long enough, fight back hard enough, dig in your heels deep enough, you'll win. But what if the opposite is true? What if real strength lies in the unclenching? In walking away, not in retreat, but in command. To let go is not to give up. It's to stop handing over your peace in exchange for a battle that proves nothing. And when you finally understand this, when you truly see that choosing calm over chaos is not defeat but direction, you begin to master something most people never will: emotional clarity. We grow up believing that letting go is what the weak do when they run out of options. But letting go before the storm escalates, before your emotions hijack your integrity, before your anger defines your identity, that requires a mind trained in silence. A mind that no longer needs to shout to be heard. Because letting go doesn't mean silence in fear, it means silence in control. It's the decision not to be reactive, to not be dragged into every drama, to not make someone else's ignorance the author of your story. That's not resignation, that's restraint. And in restraint lives power. Nowhere is this clearer than in conflict. Someone insults you, spreads lies, and questions your character. Everything inside wants to strike back, to prove your worth, to destroy the falsehood. But what is that instinct really saying? I still need validation from the very person who disrespected me. When you cling to offense, you let the offender live rent-free in your mind. Their words echo, their face appears in your thoughts, and their actions control your mood. But when you let go, when you refuse to be baited, when you decide their behavior is not your responsibility, you win. Quietly. Completely. And make no mistake, this is a conscious act of self-respect, not the kind that screams, but the kind that moves on. The Stoics knew this deeply. They didn't seek vengeance because they didn't need it. They didn't obsess over public opinion because their identity was grounded in virtue, not validation. They let go, not because they were indifferent, but because they were sovereign. Epictetus said, "We suffer not from events, but from our judgments about them." And many of our judgments are built around an illusion that holding on will fix the pain. But holding on, more often than not, only feeds it. Letting go is an unspoken wisdom. It doesn't chase apologies. It doesn't wait for closure. It doesn't demand the world to make things right before moving forward. It moves forward anyway. And that movement is what separates emotional survivors from emotional masters. Survivors adapt to pain. Masters transcend it. They use pain as polish, not armor. They see that clinging to anger doesn't make them powerful, it makes them predictable. And predictability is what gives others control. When people know they can pull a certain string and get a reaction, you've already lost the game. But when you no longer react, when your mood is not dictated by their provocation, you've rewritten the rules. I remember years ago, a man I respected deeply blindsided me with betrayal. It wasn't the act that broke me, it was the meaning I gave it. I obsessed over it, replayed it, tried to make sense of why someone I trusted would act that way. And in that obsession, I lost months of sleep, energy, and focus. Until one morning, I looked in the mirror and asked a brutal question. How long will I let him own space in my mind? And that question shattered the illusion. Because the truth was, I wasn't fighting him. I was feeding the version of me that needed to win. And that version was drowning in pride. Letting go didn't mean forgetting. It meant freeing myself from the idea that justice had to come in my form, on my timeline, with my closure. And in that release, I found my clarity. In everyday life, letting go looks like biting your tongue when the comeback is on the tip of it. It looks like smiling instead of correcting someone who just misunderstood you. It looks like walking away from gossip, from arguments, from noise that does nothing but stir the dust. This is not passivity. This is selection. Choosing what deserves your energy. Choosing what aligns with your values. Choosing to build inner strength through stoic self-discipline, rather than wasting it on battles that leave you empty, even if you win. So if you've been taught that real men never back down, rewrite that lesson. Backing down from nonsense is not surrender, it's evolution. You don't need to be right in everyone's eyes. You don't need to settle every score. You don't need to keep proving your worth to those who've already decided to misunderstand you. What you need is peace. Not the kind handed to you by perfect circumstances, but the kind forged in the fire of discipline. Letting go is not weakness, it's mastery. The mastery of knowing that not everything deserves a reaction, that not every injustice is yours to avenge, that your energy is a currency too valuable to spend on emotional debts that never get paid. And the moment you start living this truth, not just nodding at it, but embodying it, you become the calm in the chaos, the stillness in the storm, the man no one can rattle. And that, more than any outburst or act of revenge, is what true strength looks like. 7. You can't control people, but you can control the meaning you give their words. There's a strange kind of freedom hidden in one of life's most frustrating truths. You cannot control people. You can't dictate what they say, how they say it, when they speak, or whether they show kindness, cruelty, or complete indifference. People will misunderstand you, interrupt you, overlook you, and sometimes insult you outright. And while we're taught to respond with equal force, to defend, correct, confront, the deeper truth is this: the power isn't in stopping their words, it's in shaping your interpretation of them. That's where control lives, not in their mouth, but in your mind. When someone criticizes you, they're offering a sentence, but you're the one who turns that sentence into a verdict. You're the one who gives it weight, sharpens its edge, and allows it to pierce, or not. Because every insult is neutral until it finds meaning in the listener's head. You can hear, "You're lazy," and collapse into shame. Or you can hear it and see it for what it often is: a projection, a misunderstanding, a moment of their stress misfiring toward you. The Stoics understood this better than anyone. They taught that the world outside us doesn't hurt us. It's our beliefs about the world that do. And this shift in thinking changes everything. It reclaims emotional control. Because once you understand that nobody can make you angry unless you hand them the script, you begin to realize how many times you've been baited by meaning you never had to accept. You've been made to feel inferior, not because their words had power, but because you gave them power. But what if you didn't? What if you learned to examine a message before internalizing it? What if you paused and asked, is this true? Is this useful? Is this mine to carry? That space between stimulus and interpretation is where inner peace begins to form. Not by avoidance, but by awareness. We're quick to believe that if something offends us, it must be valid. But offense isn't always a sign of truth. It's often just a sign of untrained interpretation. We assign meaning based on old wounds, fears, insecurities, and pride. Someone makes a lighthearted comment and it hits like a blade, not because they meant harm, but because we translated it through a lens of sensitivity. The work, then, is not to make the world speak perfectly. It's to clean the lens. And Stoic practice sharpens that lens daily through reflection, perspective-taking, and emotional detachment. Imagine walking into a meeting, offering your thoughts, and someone dismisses them with a smirk and a snide remark. The old version of you might burn inside, feel disrespected, replay it for hours. But the Stoic mind sees it differently. It doesn't hear just their words. It hears the noise behind the words. Their stress, their ego, their insecurity, maybe even their misunderstanding. And instead of responding with heat, you respond with stillness. Because that person doesn't define you, and their interpretation of your worth doesn't become your own unless you let it. This doesn't mean you turn numb. It means you become discerning. You choose where to invest your attention. You choose which words become commands and which dissolve like vapor. It means no longer being a slave to tone, to sarcasm, to the moods of strangers. Emotional resilience isn't about building a wall. It's about building a filter. Let the nonsense pass. Let the irrelevant pass. Let the inaccurate pass. Because your peace should not depend on someone else's bad day. When you practice this, the world doesn't stop being noisy, but it stops being so loud in your head. You no longer carry around other people's opinions like burdens. You learn to walk lighter, more free. You learn to ask deeper questions. Why did that affect me so much? What belief got triggered? Am I responding to them or to something inside me that still needs healing? These questions don't make you passive, they make you powerful. Because they shift your focus inward, where actual growth happens. I remember a time when a peer dismissed something I had worked on for months. Their tone was sharp, their words cut deep. And for days, I fumed, not because they held authority over me, but because I had given their opinion more meaning than it deserved. I had allowed their judgment to echo louder than my own self-trust. And when I sat with that truth, I realized the issue wasn't their comment. It was my interpretation of what it meant about me. From that day on, I started asking myself in every interaction, is this about them or is this about me choosing how I define myself? And the answers changed how I walk through the world. So the next time someone throws words your way, careless, sharp, or uninformed, pause. Not out of fear, but out of sovereignty. Let your silence be louder than their volume. Let your clarity outshine their confusion. You can't control their words, but you can control what they mean to you. And that's where your freedom begins. Not when they finally speak the way you wish, but when you no longer need them to. That's when you rise above the noise, not because you're detached from the world, but because you're finally attached to what matters, your own interpretation, your own emotional clarity, and your own mastery of response. 8. Emotional strength is built like a muscle, through repetition. Every time you hold back from snapping at someone who pushed your limit, every time you choose stillness instead of retaliation, every time you let a frustrating moment pass without letting it shape your identity, you're training. Just like lifting weights builds your physical frame, responding calmly to life's pressure builds your internal structure. Emotional strength is not gifted. It's not inherited. It's not something you read about once and suddenly acquire. It is forged day after day, in silence, in discomfort, in repetition. And once you understand that, you'll never view a tough moment the same way again. You'll begin to see that every inconvenience, every rude remark, every delayed flight, every forgotten thank you, it is an opportunity to train. Because emotional mastery isn't about never feeling anything. It's about feeling everything without being ruled by it. Most people misunderstand emotional resilience. They think it means being cold, unbothered, and distant. But it doesn't. It means being in control. It means your reactions are chosen, not automatic. It means that even in the middle of chaos, your peace remains intact because you've built it from the inside out. That kind of strength can't be borrowed or faked. It only comes from repetition. Practicing emotional control when it would be easier to lash out, grounding yourself when it would be easier to explode. This connects deeply to Stoic philosophy. The Stoics never promised you a painless life. They promised a more powerful response to pain. And that response is not theoretical. It's practical, and it's learned the same way you learn anything else that matters, by doing it again and again. The same way you don't build muscle from a single workout, you don't build emotional endurance from one inspirational video or one good day. You build it when the day is hard and you still pause before reacting. You build it when someone crosses a boundary and you respond with calm clarity instead of rage. You build it when the world disappoints you, but you don't let it define you. So here's a reality that separates those who want peace from those who earn it. You will be tested constantly. Life is relentless like that. You'll get cut off in traffic. You'll receive that passive-aggressive text. Your boss will say something dismissive. Your spouse will misunderstand you. And in those exact moments, you will face the choice. React and reinforce the old pattern, or breathe, step back, and respond from a place of discipline. And the more you choose the latter, the stronger your emotional muscles get. Until one day, what once enraged you now simply passes by like background noise. Not because the world changed, but because you did. That's the real prize. Knowing that what used to control you now holds no power. The comment that used to haunt your mind for days now lands like a feather. The rejection that once spiraled into self-doubt now becomes data, not drama. This isn't magic. This is practice. Intentional, repeated, grounded in awareness. The most peaceful people you know aren't peaceful by nature. They are peaceful by choice, practiced over time, refined through fire. And yes, sometimes you'll mess it up. You'll snap. You'll lose it. You'll say something you wish you hadn't. That's part of the training too. The key is not to demand perfection, but progress. And progress is simple to measure. Did you pause 1 second longer than last time? Did you walk away instead of escalating? Did you smile, even a small one, when someone expected you to explode? Those moments are not small, they are sacred. They are signs that your emotional control is no longer a theory, It's a tool you're learning to use. And the more you use it, the sharper it gets. In my own life, this practice changed everything. I used to think being strong meant speaking louder, reacting faster, and asserting myself in every room. But over time, I began to see how draining that was. I was always on edge, always ready to fight, always assuming the worst. It wasn't strength, it was insecurity dressed as aggression. So I started small. I picked one trigger: interruptions. I committed to staying calm when someone talked over me. Not just staying silent, but staying peaceful. At first, I failed more than I succeeded, but I kept at it. Day after day, conversation after conversation. And one afternoon, during a heated meeting, someone cut me off, and I didn't even flinch. I waited, nodded, and when it was my turn again, I spoke with calm confidence. No spike in my heart rate, no anger rising, just control. That day, I knew the muscle was working. So ask yourself, what do you need to practice? What triggers can become training grounds? Don't wait for ideal conditions. Use your current life. The people who test your patience are your gym partners. The delays, the arguments, the unmet expectations, those are your weights. And if you approach them with the right mindset, they won't break you. They'll build you. You want to never be angry again? You want to understand your reactions so deeply that nothing outside of you can shake your peace? Then train. Daily. Quietly. Without applause. Build your emotional muscle through repetition. You won't feel the change overnight. But one day, you'll look back and realize that what used to control you now moves through you like wind through trees. Noticed, but never destructive. And in that moment, you'll smile. Not because the world became kinder, but because you became stronger. When you truly understand where anger comes from, and more importantly, who gives it power, you'll realize you were never trapped by the world around you. You were trapped by how you responded to it. But now, you hold the blueprint to emotional freedom. Each pause, each moment of silence, each refusal to react blindly is a deliberate act of strength. This isn't about becoming passive. It's about choosing clarity over chaos, self-mastery over emotional slavery. Every time you hold your ground with calm instead of rage, you reclaim your mind. You train your emotional resilience like a muscle. And in time, what once triggered you will lose its grip entirely. So from today, stop giving others permission to control your peace. Refuse to be defined by the noise of others. Anchor your actions in stillness and response, not reaction. The Stoics didn't teach theory, they lived practice. And now, so can you. If this message spoke to something in you, don't let it end here. Share your experience below. Your battles with anger, your moments of clarity, your breakthroughs, because your story might be the spark someone else is waiting for. Let's grow stronger together, one mindful response at a time.